howdy.
Howdy.
Works. I want to try something a bit more familiar to me and see how you go with this. G'day.
G'day.
Oh, that's not bad. You've been teaching them. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for this invitation. Jeffrey and I, as he said, go back some time, but it's funny, talking to Tom, company I'm working with, APP, is doing some work on one of their projects in Brisbane, Australia, and the gentleman from who's now the US chair of the ULI, only last week I was press ganged into being the local district chair of the ULI, so you and I might be talking a little more, so it is a small world. I want to thank you all for adopting Jeffrey as one of your own, and I have to say that many of us in Australia would quite like him back. We need his plain speaking, his common sense approach. It's a rare and increasingly precious commodity. But he keeps telling me he's put his roots down here and he's only leaving in a box. So I guess you've all got him for a while longer yet. Now, I don't know what Jeff has suggested you might expect from me. I don't consider myself much of an expert or anywhere near as qualified as any of you are, but hopefully this humble Aussie might have a few things to share that I've picked up over 32, 35 years in the industry, studying it and trying to understand it as best I can. Jeff has also reminded me I've lost count of how many emails I received and all the attachments that always go with those emails. So you've all suffered the same fate, yeah. Right. That the topic for today is the year 2020 as a year of perfect vision. Now, I think that's a very appropriate theme. Maybe it's just me, but it does seem to be getting harder to see things clearly. Our industry and the professions that make it up are facing new and difficult challenges and opportunities all the time, but many of those things today now seem to cloud our ability to see things for what they are, and some even handicap our ability to listen and hear what others are saying. Some of us, it seems to me, are becoming deliberately as blind and as deaf as we can possibly manage. So I'll come to some of that later on. I'd like to begin though with something that inspired me or made me think deeply about our industry, and it's very relevant to the topic of your conference today, which was a quote from your President John F. Kennedy. December, just gone, I was invited to Boston to do some judging for MIT, who are working with one of our universities on polycentric urban development. So that's how I came to become in that part of the world. And I thought I'll go down and have a look at the Kennedy Presidential Library. I started off on the global library tour of US presidents after Jeffrey showed me this one here, so I thought they were magnificent, have to see more. And when you get to the Kennedy Library, they take you down into a theatre, and it starts with a documentary of his early life. And at the very start of that documentary is this quote from Kennedy. He says, "The great enemy of truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive and unrealistic. Too often," he said, "we hold fast to the cliches of our forebears. We subject all facts to a prefabricated set of interpretations." And this was a line that resonated with me. "We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." Now that was his commencement address at Yale University, 11th of June 1962. We enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. I mean, wow, 58 years later, how prescient is that today? The key message I'd like to leave with you is that, in my view at least, the forces shaping real estate assets and their enduring value today, tomorrow, in the years to come, are very much the same as they have always been, but understanding them and applying our minds to them to create lasting real estate value requires a lot more thought, and often that thought is more uncomfortable than we perhaps have been used to in the past. Let's for a moment think about one of those forces that acts on everything that we do, demography. And I think it was Auguste Comte who's attributed with the saying, demography is destiny, sometime back in the mid-early 1800s. It's as valid today as it ever was. Changes in the characteristics of any given population are always reflected in the real estate environment around them. It shapes demand for housing types, location, amenities. It shapes demand for education from childcare to universities. It drives decisions on transit infrastructure, on public utilities, recreation facilities, healthcare facilities. All of these things are influenced and shaped by the nature of the people and the needs within a given community. Now, I know there are many other forces exerting their influence on our industry. Many of you are experts in these. There's real estate finance, new construction methodologies, the rapid evolution of building materials, changes to project procurement and delivery models, and the steady advancement of sustainable development principles, all of which are familiar if unpredictable. They're all important, they're highly influential, and for many of you, the focus of your learning, continued learning, or professional lives. But are they as fundamental to everything we do as demography is? And if demography is fundamental, an immutable force, I'd like to suggest it has a twin, the yin to its yang, if you like. And that's something I like to call jobography. And where demography is about the characteristics of any given population, jobography, I can't pronounce it myself and I've tried to coin the term, jobography is about the characteristics of industries, businesses, and all of the occupations that they require and in the locations they require them. Where and how we live and where and how we work are the twin pillars of society. They shape everything that we do. It strikes me that while we invest considerable time and energy thinking about how demography is shaping the challenges of our built environment, we spend more time thinking about how we should spend more time thinking about how a changing employment and industry landscape is changing that other aspect of what we do. I said earlier that understanding and applying the forces shaping lasting real estate value now requires a lot more thought and much of it uncomfortable. So why is that? Well, if only our job was as simple as responding to the changing demands of demography and jobography, letting the needs of residents and workers drive development which meets their needs at their price points and in the locations they want to be. Doing so with a responsible approach to the environmental impacts these days, I hope that goes without saying, and likewise doing so with respect to community values of racial, cultural diversity, recognising and responding to minority needs along with the majority. All of these things should these days go without saying. But things are more complicated and it's us that have made it so. Perfect vision is clouded now by a fog of regulation and policy making which seems increasingly, certainly in Australia, and I believe probably not so much in Texas, but these are things that are now at odds with how we might otherwise respond to community needs. It strikes me that much of our policy making, regulation and urban planning orthodoxy is increasingly trying to impose outcomes on the market and the community rather than respond to people's or industry's needs. That leads to conflict between the lawmaker, the regulator or the policymaker and the public, and very often it's our industry that finds itself sandwiched in the middle. Let me share a couple of examples with you. Worldwide we are globalising, and the United Nations will say that half the world's population now lives in cities or half the world's population is urban. As it turns out, urbanisation is taking place mostly in suburbia. But it doesn't suit the mainstream narrative to recognise the significance of suburbia nor its dominant role in housing people and in employing them. Rather, it's become de rigueur to criticise the suburban form, often denying it significant policy attention and support, while at the same time celebrating the mythological powers of high density urban cores to generate creativity, innovation, cultural diversity and a range of other virtuous outcomes which apparently happen nowhere else. Can I suggest to you all that suburbia is not a condition that needs curing, all right? It's not an ailment. Instead, it could be looked upon as a great opportunity for something to be optimised. Better suburban designs, enhanced environmental outcomes, energy efficiency, preparedness for rapid technological change through autonomous vehicles, the fields of exploration across the suburban domain are more than enough to keep people like us busy. Yet, while suburbia remains steadfastly and stubbornly popular with the wider community, it's not something supported by orthodox planning, at least in Australia. Instead, our orthodoxy now mandates that growth, nearly all growth, needs to take place within urban centres and be in the preferred form of high or medium density dwellings. This, mind you, in a country with the same continental land mass as the United States and with a population of only 25 million people. Evidently, we are running out of land. In terms of jobography, there is also a concerted effort by governments at all levels to support CBDs and inner city regions with generous taxpayer-funded infrastructure, while suburban centres of employment are left to fend for themselves. This is being done to support the jobs of the inner city, which policymakers covet above the jobs of working and middle-class suburbia. The IT engineering business in a downtown office is a lucrative prize. The dozens of factory or retail shop workers in a suburban centre are acceptable collateral damage in a changing economy. We have two very different value principles applied to those markets. In my hometown, Brisbane, the highest and fastest growing regions, which are expected to cope with a 1/3 population increase in 15 years, right? That's a third in 15 years. The areas being tasked with accommodating that growth are also the areas which receive the lowest funding in absolute and per capita terms. The greatest investment is applied to inner city and to the theory, uncorroborated by available market evidence, that everyone wants to live in or near the CBD, and all of the jobs are in or want to be near the CBD. Here we have the comfort of opinion, uninterrupted by the discomfort of thought. It's leading to a misalignment of housing and employment policies right across Australia. We have regional and local planning frameworks which actively promote housing forms and locations which are not aligned with broader community appetites, and we have government budgets which are rewarding wealthy, privileged residents of inner city locations with sumptuous capital works programs designed to further enhance their already advantaged inner urban amenity. Meanwhile, suburban residents endure ageing and dilapidated infrastructure as if being punished for their lifestyle choices. Now, please don't think any of these sentiments make me some sort of a socialist. I'm certainly not. Many people who know me would say that many of my views are to the right of Genghis Khan, all right? But I see in all of this an issue of equity and fairness, and it troubles me deeply for our industry. We cannot proceed to create real, enduring community value if it measures its progress in urban design, in city planning, placemaking or real estate development by referencing only the wealthiest, most privileged parts of our cities. Our enduring legacy should be to enhance and improve the opportunities for the equitable enjoyment of urban amenity and built form for all citizens of all classes, all backgrounds, all occupations and in all locations. I was reminded of this recently. I went to New York. I wanted to look at some of the new developments. Hudson Yards was one of them, and I shared my lament about the, I hope no one's involved, but uninspiring glass towers that make up Hudson Yards so far. And I had one comment came back through my LinkedIn network that an architect who said, Zaha Habib shows how it's done. Look at 520 West 28th Street. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a very Jetsons looking design, very impressive. I took it in from the High Line. But I also did some work, and I discovered that to live there would cost a starting price of maybe $5 million. The penthouse was $50 million. And so I thought, well, this was superb architecture, but for whom? And really, is this an example of how it's done? Because it cannot be replicated across the wider community. So it strikes me that, in a similar way, much of our focus on best practice designs in real estate development looks to high-end markets over the practical day-to-day affordability issues that face the average citizen. I've tried for many years to encourage our urban planners in Australia to accept that affordability should be at least one of their performance indicators. We have, across the world, some of the most expensive housing in the Australian cities of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. In Sydney, you will be up from maybe 10 times your income, the average person's income, to enter the housing market. It isn't much better in Melbourne or Brisbane. But in my pleadings, I'm not succeeding. The implications of various policy decisions on housing costs for the average family tend to be overlooked, while the achievements of high-end real estate developments are enthusiastically toasted at conferences, in professional journals and across the media. There's another concern in all this that bothers me. and that is the emotional detachment of unelected policymakers, academics and market commentators from the genuine needs and aspirations of the wider community. Elements of urban policy in Australia are now not only at odds with community aspiration, but in some places even hostile to the idea that the community are entitled to a meaningful say in the urban form that surrounds them. Let me give you another example. Recently in Brisbane, the idea of a missing middle housing form, which you'd be familiar with that, has been promoted as a means of meeting some of these population targets. In places that has seen townhouse development appear in long-established single-family home neighbourhoods. And this hasn't gone down terribly well with the local community. Sensing this, the Brisbane City Council ran a community-wide public engagement program. I called it push polling because they were clearly trying to get the outcome they wanted, which was that we need high density in established neighbourhoods. They spent a lot of money on this program, tens of thousands of people responded, but the community response was resolute. They weren't interested. They were not interested in seeing this form of housing enter their single family neighbourhoods. And it's a little wonder because much of it was investment grade, designed purely for speculators, had low build quality, minimal design values. I think there's a technical planning and design term for this. It's but ugly. And if it wasn't but ugly, it was at the other end of the spectrum. We're talking multi-million-dollar developments designed for only the wealthy new inhabitants, gentrifying neighbourhoods that once housed working and middle-class families. So as the community expressed its displeasure through the usual democratic means to their locally elected councillors, the councillors from both sides of politics sensed what was going on and resolved that they should ban any further development of townhouses in established single-family neighbourhoods. They can still be developed where it's appropriately zoned. They can be developed near transit centres, transit-orientated development, all the rest of it. It wasn't banned, but they put a stop to it entering single-family neighbourhoods. Now, most alarming to that decision, to me, was the venom and hostility directed at the community for having the temerity to hold those views and at their elected representatives for having the nerve to actually represent their community attitudes. One said, "The community doesn't understand the full story because they are not experts in the field of city design and planning." That came from a town planner. Another said, "This is plainly and simply a political move because they want to win the election next year." That was from the Housing Industry Association, to which I say, duh, because no politician is ever going to win an election taking forward a policy of killing all the firstborn. I mean, it's just plain stupid. And another comment, again from a town planner, the most alarming, said, "It's concerning that we listen to the general public for planning in our city rather than the experts who understand the growth of a city." I mean, wow. Is that just obey your betters? Father knows best. Here are the people who revel in the comfort of their own opinions without the discomfort of thought. They see nothing wrong with imposing their opinions on communities who may justifiably resist them. And for these people in our industry, the democratic process is just an intrusion on their right to rule. Sentiments like this can seriously cloud our thinking if we let them. Now, I'm sorry if any of that leaves you thinking I'm a bit negative or jaundiced over what's happening in our industry. I'm actually far more positive than that might all sound. I know that here in the US there's a number of authors, academics, researchers and others who are exploring that discomfort of thought and are applying it to some long established and unchallenged opinions, and it's a healthy and I find a very entertaining debate. Likewise, in Australia we are seeing renewed interest in lasting real estate value across all communities for all to enjoy, not just the privileged few. And as Jeffrey mentioned, I was made last year chairman of the Lord Mayor's Better Suburbs initiative, essentially looking at suburban renewal opportunities across our city, which has a population now of about 1.8 million, I think. He did so because he recognised that we could not create two classes of Brisbane resident, the haves and the have-nots, the inner city versus the suburbs. He knew that the lessons and the experience that we had gained from a 30-year program of very, very successful world-class inner urban renewal, I'd have to say, could also be applied to a range of suburban centres so that all residents can enjoy more broadly the equal opportunities in civic amenity and the quality of life. So that's a hugely positive step forward. Okay, so let's wrap all this up and see what we're left with. To me, the forces shaping real estate assets and that direct the shape and form of our cities and suburbs are much as they have always been. They're fundamentals of demography and jobography. We could do well to study the latter a bit more than we have done with the former. Creating lasting value means understanding what is happening to these fundamental drivers of society and applying many of the skills and professional insights represented by you in this room, from design to planning to construction, finance, development and so on, to find creative quality real estate solutions. That value, as others have already said today, is not measured solely in dollar terms and essentially cannot just be for the wealthiest beneficiaries or the most expensive physical expressions of what we do. True lasting value contributes to the community as a whole, in all its diversity. Clarity of vision means exercising that discomfort of thought that Kennedy alluded to, and not indulging too much in the comfort of opinions, however popular or loudly expressed. This is getting harder all the time, but along with it, it's getting more important. Our skills in listening, observing and absorbing have never been more in demand. And finally, it should never mean assuming that we are superior beings to our fellow community members. Their opinions, wishes, preferences and aspirations deserve our respect. If we believe there are better ways forward, it's not for us to look down upon others or deride and dismiss their views. It's up to us to get in amongst them, to listen, observe and engage, because that is where true leadership in the industry will be found. Thank you all for the privilege of joining you here today. And I must say it was a very special moment for me to see you all recognise this bloke over here with that award. So good on you. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of time, deliberately left a little bit of time. Is that Mike Roby? Okay. So we're going to put this joker to the test. He wants to get in amongst you. So if any of you got, is this active? If any of you got a question, he's going to walk down to you and you're going to ask your question to his face. So who wants to lead off? Right.
I don't have to do it this way. Just do it.
No.
Do you think that those sentiments that you spoke about in Australia reflect over here in the U.S., those sentiments about more investment within central business districts and more urbanized areas and less investment in suburbanized areas? Does that transition over here fairly easily? Like, is that sentiment the same? Where we're not doing that as much as we should?
No, okay, well, it's a difficult answer because America's such a big country and so many different parts of it behave very differently. So California is very different to Texas, okay? And I understand that even being an Australian. I think a lot of our policies about the focus on urban and inner urban renewal have been imported, though. And I think they've been applied without a lot of thought to the potential impacts. I mean, as I said before, 25 million people in Australia. It's as big as this place. It's nuts. And there are people who will, hand on heart, stand up at a conference and say, we are running out of land. And it is just absurd that those ideas haven't been challenged. So as I said, I think some of those ideas have been imported without much criticism, or they haven't been adapted to local circumstance. And they also have been applied across our cities as if every city is the same. Sydney is our global headquarters. It's our version of New York, if you like. I think there's 5 million people live there now. What works in Sydney does not work in Brisbane, and what works in Brisbane does not work in Perth. So this sort of everyone goes to the same conference, comes back with the same handbook approach and applies it to their local city. That's really making a mess of things. I don't think that's answered your question properly, though.
I think that covers the gist of it.
Okay.
It's more situational. Ideas. The ideas that we implement in our cities and our communities should be, the site's context should matter.
That's right. They should be bespoke to the community that surrounds them. As I said, demography, it's really important. Every city's got a different cultural mix, a different profile on age, on race, background, on education, everything. And the same with the industries that make that city tick. So, we can't all just be the tech hubs or the STEM centres, right? It's just not going to work. Some cities will be manufacturing centres, some will be resource dependent, some will be cities built around education. But this is not a menu. You can't just go to it and select what you want and then apply it to your city without regard to the local circumstance.
All right, thank you.
I need the exercise after a big lunch.
Work up for lunch, yeah. It was a fantastic presentation. I appreciate it, especially after a lot of the things that I talked about today were really focused on urbanization. But I agree with you. I think the suburbs get a very bad rep, and it's been that's been a very distinctly American form of development since World War II. And so I guess here in the U.S. we have a problem, at least a problem that I see, where our suburbs trade near-term cash advantages to grow in exchange for long-term liabilities in the form of our infrastructure maintenance. And so we extend these municipal services to our new subdivisions, and we get further and further out. And then ultimately the cities fall back, and they expect the tax dollars to cover not only the extension of services, but also the replacement, repair of the old infrastructure and the ongoing maintenance of the new infrastructure. And so I guess the question is it the public that's bearing the burden of the long-term costs of suburbanization in Australia as well? Or have you seen any better ways forward?
Okay, well, the first to the new suburbs that are being developed, what I'd suggest is that typically they are being developed exactly the same way as they've been developed for 50 years, since Levittown, but slightly nicer, okay? Mm-hmm. And that creates the infrastructure legacy issues you're talking about. There are better ways to design new suburbs. I was trying to allude to before, the impact of autonomous vehicles, where, a lot of suburbs have a garage for 2 cars. Well, we're not that far away when we won't even need a car. We'll just get on our phone, dial up the app and say, well, today I need a micro vehicle because I'm just doing a local commute, and on the weekend I'll need a utility because I'm going to Walmart and pick up a whole bunch of stuff, and they will come from a solar charged central garage, and we'll own shares in the cars. We won't own them personally. We could reduce the lane space, the pavement area, I think you call it, right? Because they only need to travel in one direction. There's a whole bunch of things in terms of, particularly environmental, you'll feel the environmental land management in terms of, water, overland flows and local on-site water treatment that can be done, but typically they're not. And a lot of the people who are applying the rule book are applying the same rule book of 50 years ago, and they say, what, you want to do that how? We don't do that here. So that's part one. We can do the new suburbs a lot better. Part two is, I think what we're missing is the opportunity for suburban renewal. So we're jumping over some of the established suburbs, in part because some of their infrastructure is undercapitalised, or it's 50, 60 years old and has had no reinvestment in that amount of time. So we leapfrog that and go to the next phase, whereas in fact it could make a lot more sense to reinvest in some of those existing suburban centres, suburban business districts, enhance that amenity with a view of recycling that community into its next life. And that's the point I was trying to make, is that at least in Australia we seem to think that that whole point of recycling and improving the infrastructure assets and the placemaking qualities should all be in the CBD, and that suburbs should just be dormitories. Whereas I think, if we actually looked at what's happening around us with open eyes and listening to what people are saying, we'd see that there's a lot more opportunity to renew those existing areas and get the same benefit for far less investment.
You get the same problem. We missed the mark here there too. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay, so hello, Ross. It's great to see you again. But in kind of the tradition of British and Australian debating societies, where people ask each other, tough, contrarian questions, right? Okay, so one of the things that we sometimes see in the United States is, or some people perceive, is that the developers take control of the town council. And so while you're talking about the town council being sort of authoritarian and dictatorial, sometimes we see local developers become, all the decisions by the town council seem to be favoring the developers, and it's favoring, say, greenfield development on the edges and such. Is that something you see in Australia, or is that a problem you're concerned about as well?
Well, I think what happens is you go from one extreme to the other, don't you? That's what always happens. It overswings the middle point and goes to the other. So in Queensland last year, we had a number of local councils who weren't behaving terribly well. One was sacked entirely. The mayor of another one is, he's in jail. That's Basali. He's never getting out of there. Luke Smith, who's mayor of Logan, his court case is on right now. It looks like he's going to go to jail. Alan Sutherland has been charged, probably not going to make him stick, so he was lucky. And the Gold Coast mayor, whose name is Alan Tate. I think Alan Tate's also mayor of Anaheim. I met the actual Alan Tate in Anaheim. He said, will you ask those people on the Gold Coast to stop sending me their resident hate mail? But what's happened now is, because of these allegations of developers corrupting councils, the state government has banned all donations from the development industry to any political party or council. So from local government, state government, federal government, in Queensland, the industry cannot donate to candidates. I can't, even me as a consultant in the industry, if I'm involved in any aspect of the industry, I can't even buy a ticket in a chook raffle in support of my candidate, right?
I don't know what a chook raffle is.
A raffle, lottery for a chicken.
I don't know what a chook is.
Chicken raffle. Doesn't sound the same, Jeffrey. Doesn't sound the same. So a big chunk of the industry is now being disenfranchised, and we can't have a say. I don't know that that's very healthy either. The other thing I learnt when taking on this role with the Lord Mayor, and this really stunned me, is that to further separate those powers, a traditional separation of powers, if you like, from the elected representatives and the administration or the bureaucrats. In Brisbane, well, in fact, all Queensland councillors, you can be elected on a platform by the people, but as their elected representative, you cannot instruct any employee of that council to do anything. You have to ask the CEO of the council if they wouldn't mind terribly, would you please ask the head of planning to give this some kind consideration because we'd really like it done. So, what's the connection? You've voted for a platform, your mayor and the councillors decide to, take that platform through, but the local bureaucrats who work in those councils can just fold their arms and say, nah, you can't tell me what to do, because that would be corruption. So the flip side of that coin, yeah, it's a problem. But I think if you go too far the other way, you create an even bigger problem.
Any other questions? Someone wants? Oh, Tom. Oh, you beauty.
If
Look
you,
at that. You get his. He can have mine.
no, no, don't. If you look at, I don't know if you've done it, a single-family house, average cost here in Texas, and then you go look at it in your country. Why is it so expensive in your country? I mean, it's not land. As you say, you got more of it than we do.
Well, okay, I spent a lot of my time, I set up the Residential Development Council in Australia because major developers were asking precisely this, and they said, help us, this is a mess. Land supply is restricted. So while we might have a lot of land, there are on the outskirts of our cities, the urban growth boundaries, and I can step from this side of that boundary where land is suitably zoned for single family housing, and I step over here and all of a sudden it's not. This is cattle property, and this side of the fence is family. So that has bid up the price of land within those containment boundaries, and buying in globo parcels that developers are looking for to develop more single family is very expensive because of that. On top of that, we have an approach to funding infrastructure, back to your question back there, where every single lot is taxed. Now the per lot fee for housing is, I think it's 35 or 40,000 Australian dollars. And if it's an apartment, I think it's 20. So even in the inner city apartments, it's 20,000. On top of that, we have a general services tax, a GST or a VAT. That's 10%. Then we have sales tax. We have a variety of other taxes and charges on top of all of that, most of which are actually applied to the land. So the land has become the more expensive component than the actual house. Building the house, we can still knock those out for about $1,000, $1,200 a square metre, which is a cheap form of building. The land on which it sits, though, is very pricey. And the industry's response and the preferred planning response has actually been to reduce the block size. So we've gone from typical average of 600 square metres, which is what in feet, Jeffrey? Okay. And now we're down to like 350 square metre blocks of land. And the result of which is that by the time you put a house on it, there's no room. And this is a result, this is a policy outcome that they planned for, unbelievably. So, Tom, the answer is that the land has become expensive because it's constrained. They've drawn the boundaries, there was no science to it at the time, and they haven't changed the boundaries because they want to appeal to the green left inner city vote that is completely hostile to the notion of sprawl. You know, don't get me started on this subject.
So it's really not land that's expensive, it's the regulators have made land expensive.
This is a policy-induced mistake.
Yeah, policy. And
all policy and tax, yeah.
We have the left coast that does that also.
Yeah. They all went to the same conference, Tom.
You've got to understand, Australians, because they started out as convicts, they're kind of weird because they've never met a tax or a regulation they didn't love. So, and you think I'm joking, but I mean, here in Texas with our land, we're able to amortise the capital costs of improvement over 20, 25 years. In Australia, you pay that upfront capital cost as a tax. Therefore, it's the charge to the purchase of the property right from day one. It's great for local governments because it improves the value of the land, and guess what? That's what they tax for the ongoing rate. So you get it in terms of the upfront capital contribution, which is $40,000 a lot, and then they basically tax you on that going forward, and you don't get that benefit of spreading the cash flow out over the period of time. Any other questions? All right, so Ross is going to be talking to the LAUP lecture series on when is it? Monday night, 6 p.m. in the Harold Adams presentation room in Langford A. You're all very welcome to come. It's like this conference, it's free. He's going to speak, what, for an hour or so, are you? 45 minutes, right? And then I'm going to take him to dinner. If someone wants to come to dinner with me, to actually spend more time with him, just let me know. I'm happy for you to join the team. Thank you, Ross. I think that was a pretty plain speaking sort of address. It's given people a lot of things to actually think about in terms of going forward. And then it only remains for me to actually thank you all for making the investment in coming today. It's really important for our students. It's really important that our students actually get to meet you. It's important that our students get to understand that they can talk to you. And probably one of the best ways to do that is actually breaking bread together. That breaks down the barriers a lot faster than anything else. I know you're all busy people. The thing I will point out, and it will be quoted back to me, and I don't care, right, is that if you look around the room here at the people who actually stayed the course, right, who are the people that are still in the room and who are the people that left? Who are the people that got up, left their seat and went away, right? And that is the problem that we face today. People will say one thing and they will do something completely different. We've got to get back to a circumstance where if you say something, you have to be true to your word, you have to follow through. You don't say something to someone's face and then something completely different behind their back. And I think that's the key to becoming citizens, again, instead of being partisans. And my hope is that we've still got time to see a better world, Tom, you know? Okay. Righto, thank you very much and thank you for coming. Please give yourself a hand.